The second pattern of 7 is what's called a process pattern. The process pattern is especially common in business and science textbooks. Processes discussed in both of these content areas count on people following steps in the exact order in which they are presented. So this pattern is primarily used to explain how something functions or takes place. The steps cannot be interchanged. So if you would think of the steps in CPR, if you did those steps in a random order, you could really injure the patient. They have to be done in the order prescribed. So the major details in a process pattern paragraph are the individual steps or stages in order to complete this process. And it describes the order of events that take place in real time, which cannot be altered. Some of the characteristics of a process paragraph include that usually the first, sometimes the second sentence is going to announce what process or procedure is being explained. So we know that our topic sentence will come quite early in the paragraph. Then the rest of the sentences in the paragraph introduce a new step or a stage in the larger process. Those are your major details. If the major details or steps need further elaboration, that would come in your minor details. Transitions that are used frequently in a process pattern are words like in the first step is, the second step, next, so on, finally. So each one of those transition words helps to alert us to the fact that we're moving from one step to the next. And again, the order of the steps reproduces the order in which they are occurring in real time. In other words, you cannot change the order and be successful. Let's take a look at an example paragraph. According to the writer Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, there are 5 stages in confronting the prospect of death. The first of the 5 stages is often denial, with the ailing person insisting he or she is fine. Usually short-lived, denial is replaced by anger, with the person facing death feeling unfairly targeted by fate. For those who are religious, the third stage is bargaining with a higher power, and requests are made for just a little more time in order to set things right or see something happen. For instance, let me live until my children are grown. Depression is, in many cases, the 4th stage. This is the point at which people tell themselves nothing matters because death is so close. Why bother caring about anything? If it's achieved, the final stage is acceptance, and the individual decides to accept the reality of death while getting as much as possible out of what's left in life. Can you pick out the topic sentence? Can you find the major details? Are there any minor details present? Well, the way this paragraph is formatted gives us some big hints. The topic sentence is indeed the first sentence, where we learn that the topic or the process that's going to be defined are the 5 stages in confronting the prospect of death. So we know that we're going to look for 5 major details, each one of them being one of these stages in confronting the prospect of death. The other thing that the authors of this particular paragraph did was to put each of the steps in italics. So we've got denial, followed by anger, followed by bargaining with the higher power, following depression, and then acceptance. The only minor detail in this paragraph is sentence 6, which describes what depression looks like or sounds like. When you're taking notes on a process paragraph, the first thing, the heading of your notes, should be to identify what is the process that's being explained. If you just have the random steps written down, it won't do much to aid your memory. Our minds work best when we can sort of categorize each of the steps, but we need that major heading in order to do that. So early in your notes, you should indicate the number of steps. So if you're creating your heading, it would be the 3 leading causes, the 4 major contributions. Be sure to include that number in your notes. With the process, remember that you have to follow the order of presentation in the passage, so you can't substitute the order for the steps. Sometimes in a process pattern, we also have to have the definition pattern working, because there are some key terms that you need to know in order to be able to understand the steps or the stages. And so you should take notes on those key terms as well. And probably the best way to take notes on a process pattern, again, is not to write it out longhand so that it looks just like what you read in the chapter, but it's to exercise our brains by creating a different method of displaying the information. So a flow chart often works very well for this purpose. Flow charts can be accomplished from top to bottom, which is often the way we see them. They can also sometimes follow a pattern of moving from left to right. Now, if you take a look at page 188 in your textbook, at the top of that page, you'll notice a really handy chart of transitions that identify the various steps or stages in a process pattern. Words like afterward, in this stage, over time, then, toward the end, all point as an indication that you're moving from one step to the next. On page 189, you'll see a sample of a process pattern that has a flow chart taken into consideration. And you'll notice that the first 5 steps each have their own box. But then at the end of step 5, there is an alternative. If this happens, then you would go to this box. But if this happens, then you would go to this box. And quite often you'll find that boxes branch off as the pattern progresses. Now, in your packet of sample paragraphs, what you're going to do is you're going to pick one of the 2 alternatives and you're going to create a flow chart for that alternative. Following that, complete exercise 2 in your text.